The sky was clear that Sunday afternoon. The school football field, usually quiet on weekends, was buzzing with activity. Colourful banners fluttered in the gentle breeze, and the makeshift bleachers were filled with anxious faces. It was the grand final of the school championship, and the blue-uniformed team of New Dawn School was facing its biggest rival, the red-uniformed Horizon College. Elizabeth adjusted her sunglasses on her face and smiled as she looked at the field. At 39, she remained elegant, even in the simplicity of her jeans, sneakers, and the blue school team t-shirt. Her brown hair, today tied in a carefree ponytail, framed her face with its delicate and determined features. She took a deep breath, feeling that mix of pride and nervousness that only a mother could understand. At the edge of the field, Matthew was tying his cleats, focused. At 12 years old, the boy already demonstrated an impressive seriousness when it came to football. His dark brown hair, slightly wavy like his mother's, was tousled by the wind. In the blue uniform, the captain's armband, a responsibility he carried with immense pride. Elizabeth smiled. She remembered the countless afternoons she played ball with him in the small backyard, the times she stood in the rain watching the practices, the nights consoling an 8-year-old Matthew who cried because the team had lost. That final was the result of 4 years of dedication, not only from the boy, but from her as well. "Nervous?" asked her longtime friend Sarah, who was also the mother of another player on the team. "A little," Elizabeth admitted without taking her eyes off her son. "He worked so hard for this." Matthew looked up at that moment, spotted his mother in the stands, and gave a small wave. It was a discreet gesture, but full of meaning. It was their code. "I'm okay. I'm ready." Elizabeth responded with a thumbs up and a smile that tried to hide all the emotion she was feeling. It was then that the buzz around her changed. Elizabeth noticed some curious glances, a few whispers, and her heart quickened even before she turned to see what was causing that reaction. Gregory had arrived, and he was not alone. 7 years had passed since the divorce, but Elizabeth would still recognize that posture from miles away. Tall, broad shoulders, Gregory always had presence. Now, at 41, he seemed to have regained a certain vigor he had lost in the final years of their marriage. His hair, once always somewhat long and unruly, was cut with precision. The scruff had given way to a perfectly shaved face. He was wearing a light blue shirt impeccably ironed, something so far from the Gregory she knew, always in faded t-shirts and worn jeans. Beside him was a young woman who couldn't have been more than 30 years old. Blonde hair perfectly styled, a floral dress that highlighted her slender figure, a constant smile as she took selfies with Gregory. She laughed loudly, throwing her head back in a show of enthusiasm that seemed out of place in that pre-game tension-filled environment. "Who would have thought?" murmured Sarah, who was next to Elizabeth. "The first time in... how long?" 3 years, Elizabeth replied automatically, recalling the only time Gregory had shown up at a Father's Day presentation, staying for just 15 minutes before claiming an urgent work meeting. Elizabeth watched as Matthew from the field finally noticed the presence of his father. The boy paused for a moment, as if he had received a mild shock. His eyes, as expressive as ever, briefly met his father's before looking away. His face, once animated, closed into a neutral expression that Elizabeth knew all too well. It was the mask he used to hide his disappointment. There was no smile. There was no wave. Just a quick glance before Matthew turned his attention back to warming up with his teammates. Elizabeth felt that familiar lump in her throat, the same lump she had faced so many times over the years. She remembered the nights when Matthew, still 5 years old, cried asking why Daddy hadn't called as he promised. The birthday parties where the boy kept looking at the door, waiting for an arrival that never happened. The drawings he made at school, always a family of 3 people, which he carefully kept to show his father, but ended up forgotten in a drawer because Gregory cancelled the visits at the last minute. Over time, the cries diminished. The hopeful glances at the door did too. The drawings for his father were replaced by soccer games and school friendships. Matthew had learned to live without Gregory's constant presence, although Elizabeth could see that the wound had never completely healed. It was she who invited her ex-husband to watch the game, aware that it was a decisive moment in their son's life. She just wanted the father to be present. What she didn't expect was that he would turn the occasion into a spectacle by showing up with his new girlfriend, whom he didn't even know well yet. A visibly younger woman, with at least a 15-year age difference. The whistle blew, and Elizabeth pushed her thoughts aside. Today was Matthew's day, his alone. The game started evenly, with the crowd cheering at every play. Matthew commanded the midfield with precision and game vision surprising for his age. "He plays really well," her friend commented. "He has a future." Elizabeth smiled, remembering the sacrifices. Extra training sessions, expensive cleats, late nights researching sports nutrition. Everything made sense there, seeing her son fulfilled on the field. The first half ended scoreless. During the break, she noticed Gregory mingling among the parents as if he were part of that universe. The young woman next to him was distracted by her phone. In the second half, the opponent put on the pressure. Tired, Matthew remained resolute. Then, at the 15th minute, he controlled a pass on his chest, dribbled past two defenders, and executed a skillful shot. The ball hit the post and went in. 1-0. Euphoria among the blue fans. Elizabeth jumped, shouted, hugged everyone around her and anyone within her reach. Her eyes welled up with tears as she saw Matthew being embraced by his teammates. That smile so pure. For a moment, he seemed like that 5-year-old boy again, pure, unreserved joy. The final minutes were full of tension. The opposing team pressured, seeking an equaliser, but the defence, led by Matthew's constant instructions, held strong. When the final whistle blew, an explosion of joy took over the field. The boys in blue hugged, cried and jumped. Some parents rushed onto the field to hug their children. Elizabeth remained in the stands for a moment, just watching. She wanted to give Matthew his moment with his friends. She knew how much that victory meant to him, how hard he had worked for it. It was then that she noticed Gregory approaching her. He walked with his usual confidence, but there was something different in his eyes, a mix of discomfort and an attempt at casualness. "He plays well. Congratulations to you," he said, in a tone that tried to sound natural but came off as rehearsed. Elizabeth simply nodded without smiling. There was no anger in her heart, just a kind of weariness. Weariness from waiting for recognition. Weariness from protecting Matthew from disappointments. He was selected to play on the national youth team. "He's been training with them since last year," she added, looking firmly into her ex-husband's eyes. The reaction was immediate. Gregory frowned, confusion and surprise mixing on his face. "What do you mean? He was selected, and you didn't tell me anything?" Elizabeth took a deep breath before responding. She didn't want to create a scene, not that day. "I tried. But you were always busy." She paused, controlling the tone of her voice. "He was always good, Gregory. You just were never present enough to see it." The words were not spoken with resentment. Elizabeth saw something change in Gregory's expression. The controlled smile disappeared, replaced by an expression of genuine distress. He looked out at the field, where Matthew was receiving the championship trophy along with the team, smiling and chatting excitedly with his teammates. For a moment, Elizabeth saw the weight of realization on Gregory's face, the understanding of how many moments like that he had missed. Gregory walked towards his son, calling out to him as he approached. "Son, congratulations, you played great." Matthew turned his face towards his father's voice. His eyes, previously shining with happiness, took on a polite but distant expression. He responded with a brief nod and a thanks, before returning to chat with his friends. There was no hug, no enthusiasm, no sparkle in the eyes, no dad. Elizabeth watched Gregory freeze at that moment. It was as if he finally realized the chasm he had created. For years, Matthew looked up to him as a hero, even when he did little to deserve it. But time had passed. The boy had grown up, and what was once unconditional childhood love had turned into mere formal politeness. Gregory returned to Elizabeth, trying to maintain his composure but visibly shaken. "It's just a game," he muttered, more to himself than to her. Elizabeth took a deep breath. She felt tired, not just from the day but from years of carrying alone the burden of Matthew's upbringing and disappointments. She looked directly into Gregory's eyes before responding. "No, Gregory, that's everything you have lost." The young woman next to Gregory touched his arm, trying to console him, noticing the change in his expression. But he seemed not to notice the touch. His eyes, now filled with tears, were fixed on Matthew, who was laughing with his friends, celebrating an achievement that his father only watched from a distance. In an attempt to keep up appearances, Gregory turned his back and walked hurriedly to the exit. Elizabeth didn't need to see his face to know that he was crying. For the first time, perhaps, understanding the true cost of his absence. The following Saturday there was another game, smaller, just a friendly match. Elizabeth was there, as always. Gregory did not show up, neither with his girlfriend nor alone. Elizabeth noticed but didn't mention it to anyone. She knew he needed time to process everything he had realized the previous Sunday. She didn't expect anything either. It was on Tuesday that the phone rang. Seeing Gregory's name on the screen, Elizabeth felt a twinge of apprehension. "Can I pick up my boy today?" he asked, his voice low, almost timid. "I wanted to take him for a milkshake, that's all." Elizabeth hesitated, surprised. It wasn't the request itself that surprised her, but the humility in Gregory's voice. It had been years since he called during the week, and even longer since he had proposed something simple, without grand promises like having a milkshake. "Sure," she replied, still cautious. "I'll let him know." When she told Matthew, the boy did not show much enthusiasm, but he also did not complain. He went down the stairs with his backpack on, gave his mother a quick kiss, and got into his father's car without many words. To Elizabeth's surprise, when Matthew returned hours later, there was a small smile on his face. He didn't say much, just that they talked about soccer, school, everyday things. Gregory hadn't tried to force intimacy or big moments. He was just present. And apparently that had been enough. In the following days, Gregory's phone calls became frequent. "Can I pick him up from school today?" "I wanted to help with his homework. He said he's having trouble with math." "Can you send me the practice schedule? I want to go to all of them if he allows." Elizabeth watched the change cautiously. Initially, she thought it was just a momentary remorse, transient guilt that would soon be replaced by the old pattern of absence. But the days turned into weeks, the weeks turned into months, and Gregory didn't fail anymore. It wasn't just outings or gifts. He started attending school meetings and asking about his son's emotional well-being, not just practical matters. He began helping with schoolwork, even when it meant spending an entire Sunday building a model about the country's history, despite his own limitations in history. Elizabeth also noticed that Gregory no longer brought his girlfriend to meetings with their son. When she asked about it, he simply replied, "Until it's something really serious, I will respect Matthew's space. I don't want him to feel uncomfortable." And surprisingly, he kept that promise like all the others he had been making in recent months. The most beautiful thing for Elizabeth was witnessing Matthew's gradual transformation. Slowly, the boy started smiling again in the presence of his father. He began to look forward to Wednesdays, now the official milkshake day, followed by long conversations about life, friends, fears and dreams. He started asking to sleep over at Gregory's on weekends again. And most importantly, he began to trust that paternal figure who had been so absent for so long. It wasn't the same innocent trust as before. It was something more mature, more conscious, and for that very reason, more valuable. After a particularly important game, a few months later, Elizabeth noticed that Gregory had come alone, as he always did now. When the match ended, she approached him at the exit. "Thank you," she said with genuine sincerity, "for doing what you promised, for not giving up on him." Gregory lowered his eyes in a gesture of humility that the old Gregory would never have shown. I should have done this from the beginning. She nodded, feeling a peace she never thought possible after so many years of resentment. But you're doing it now, and he sees that. He feels it. Elizabeth smiled slightly, realizing that despite her marriage to Gregory not having worked out, it was still possible to have a respectful relationship for the sake of their son. She still wanted above all for Matthew to have a present father in his life. They looked at each other for a brief moment. There was no more resentment. There was no more hurt. Just the shared acknowledgement that lost time could not be regained, but the time that remained could still be lived with dignity and presence. Because sometimes it is only when we feel the consequences of our choices that we truly understand the value of constant presence in the lives of those we love. And more importantly, the transformative power of constancy, the kind that neither shouts nor shines, but builds day by day bonds that time cannot easily break. A child's love can even be given freely at first, but over time, life teaches us all that presence is a daily construction. And when we wake up too late to this truth, we realize that there is no stage large enough to recover what was not lived in time. If you enjoyed the story, please leave a comment with a rating from 1 to 5 to show how much you liked it. Also, watch the video that is now appearing on your screen. See you soon.